I am the new heir to this company." These words echoed through the elegant boardroom of Peterson Holdings like thunder on a clear day. The entire board turned simultaneously to face the source of that impossible statement. A 16-year-old black teenager, standing at the entrance with a faded backpack on her shoulders and sneakers that had seen better days. Richard Peterson. The Millionaire CEO, sitting at the head of the mahogany table, let out a laugh so loud it made the crystals on the chandelier rattle. "You heir," he turned to the other executives, wiping away a tear from laughing so hard. "Girl, you shouldn't even be on this floor." Alexis Williams took a deep breath, her eyes scanning every face in the room. All white, all male, all wearing suits that cost more than a year's rent in her neighborhood. But there was something in her posture, a calmness unusual for someone who should have been intimidated. "My name is Alexis Williams," she repeated, this time with a firmness that cut through the laughter like a knife. "And I've come to claim my rightful inheritance from this company." The CFO, James Crawford, adjusted his glasses and muttered something about these people to his colleague. The comment didn't go unnoticed by Alexis, but she just smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 6 months before the scene, Alexis had been living a completely different life. The daughter of a cleaning lady and raised by her grandmother after her mother's early death, she never imagined she would discover she was the daughter of Thomas Peterson, Richard's younger brother and co-founder of the company. Thomas had died in a car accident when she was only 2 years old, taking with him all the secrets about her paternity. "Listen, girl," Richard stood up, his imposing height casting a shadow over her. "I don't know what game you're trying to play, but I suggest you get out of here before I call security." Alexis opened her old backpack and pulled out a yellowed folder. "Before you do that, you might want to take a look at this." The executives exchanged incredulous glances as she placed documents on the table. But as Richard picked up the papers, his face began to drain of color. "DNA test, birth certificate, will impossible," he muttered, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. Thomas never told you about his daughter." Alexis tilted her head, feigning surprise. "How strange. Because he made it very clear in his will that if anything happened to him, I should receive my share of the company when I turned 16. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall. Alexis watched every reaction, every micro-expression of panic on the faces around the table. It was as if she were reading a book she already knew by heart. James Crawford cleared his throat nervously. "Even if these documents are legitimate, a minor can assume an inheritance with proper legal representation." Alexis interrupted him gently. "And it just so happens that I already have that taken care of." Richard clenched his fists, his face red with anger. "You think you could just show up here out of nowhere?" And out of nowhere, Alexis smiled again. And this time there was something dangerous in that smile. "Mr. Peterson, I didn't show up out of nowhere. I've been preparing for this moment for months. And I have a question. Do you really believe I would come here without being absolutely certain of my right?" While everyone stared at her with a mixture of shock and contempt, Alexis maintained a serenity that only exists in those who have faced much worse storms and lived to tell the tale. There before all the incredulous stares, she stood firm like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If you're enjoying this story of a teenager who challenged an entire corporate empire, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple girl from the suburbs was about to rewrite the rules of a game they thought they knew so well. Richard Peterson examined the documents with the care of someone analyzing evidence in a courtroom, but his hands trembled slightly, a detail that did not go unnoticed by Alexis. The DNA test was indisputable, dated 3 months ago, performed at a certified laboratory. The original birth certificate clearly listed Thomas Peterson as the father. This, he held up the papers dismissively, could be forged. Anyone with access to the internet can. You can call Genesis Laboratory and confirm it." Alexis interrupted calmly, reciting the protocol number from memory. Verification code 7834B. They keep records for 5 years. The awkward silence that followed was broken by James Crawford, who cleared his throat nervously. "Even if it is legitimate, a girl of your background certainly doesn't understand the complexities of running a company of this size." Alexis tilted her head, a barely perceptible smile appearing at the corner of her lips. "My background?" Could you be more specific, Mr. Crawford? Are you referring to the fact that I'm black, poor, or both? I didn't say that, he replied quickly, his face red. You didn't have to say it. It's been written all over your face since I walked in here, she replied with a calmness that made everyone uncomfortable. Richard slammed the documents down on the table. Listen here, girl. Even if Thomas really is your father, that doesn't mean you have the right to show up here 15 years later demanding anything. 14 years, she corrected softly. He died when I was 2. The correction irritated him even more. Richard stood up, walking over to the panoramic window that offered a view of the city. You think you can just show up here and claim something you didn't build? That you don't understand? It was at that moment that Alexis revealed the first card in her hand. Actually, Mr. Peterson, I understand very well. For example, I know that Peterson Holdings is facing a federal lawsuit for racial discrimination in hiring. I know you lost 3 major contracts this year due to diversity issues, and I know the board is pushing for significant changes in leadership. Richard's jaw dropped. James Crawford nearly choked on his own air. How did a teenager from the suburbs know confidential information that barely circulated in the executive corridors? How did you? Richard began. But Alexis continued relentlessly. I also know that Thomas didn't just die in a car accident, as you've always said. He was coming to pick me up from daycare when it happened. He had been picking me up every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years religiously since my mother died. Her voice remained steady, but there was an old pain behind the words. Human Resources Director Michael Torres, who had remained silent until then, whispered to his colleague next to him. How does she know that? Alexis turned to him with the precision of radar. Because unlike you, I did my homework, Mr. Torres. I talked to the daycare owner, found photos, located people who worked here at the time. You think you erased Thomas from the company's history, but you forgot that real people remember real people. Richard turned away from the window, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. Even if all of this is true, you're a minor. You can't take on corporate responsibilities. True, Alexis nodded, but I can have a legal guardian act on my behalf until I turn 18. Someone with experience in corporate management and intimate knowledge of the history of Peterson Holdings. James Crawford laughed bitterly. And where exactly would you find someone like that? Who would want to associate with? He stopped mid-sentence as the office door opened. An elegant black woman, approximately 45 years old, entered with the confidence of someone who knows every inch of that building. She wore an impeccable suit and carried a leather briefcase that seemed to contain the weight of the world. Sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice cutting through the air like sharp silk. I'm Margaret Collins, former vice president of operations at Peterson Holdings. I worked directly with Thomas Peterson for 8 years before deciding to pursue other horizons. The blood drained from Richard's face. Margaret Collins, the brilliant executive he had forced out 3 years ago with a generous severance package, fearing she might one day threaten his position. Margaret, he stammered. What are you doing here? She smiled, placing her briefcase on the table next to Alexis. I came to meet my new client. Alexis contacted me 2 months ago. I must say I was impressed with her research into the true history of this company. Alexis remained seated, but now there was something different about her posture. No longer was she a teenager alone against a corporate empire. Now she was a teenager with a powerful ally who knew all the dirty secrets of that place. 2 months, Richard repeated, reality beginning to form in his mind like a storm cloud. Actually, 3, Alexis corrected again, her voice gaining a new firmness. It took me a while to track down Margaret, but it was worth every minute, especially when she told me about the real circumstances that led Thomas to drive alone that night. James Crawford swallowed hard. What is she talking about? Margaret opened her briefcase and took out an audio recording on an old device. Thomas called me the night of the accident. He was upset by a discovery he had made about financial irregularities at the company. He said he was going to confront someone at the office before picking up his daughter. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the air conditioning humming. Richard had turned completely pale. He never made it to the office. Margaret continued. The accident happened 3 blocks before. Very convenient, don't you think? Alexis watched every reaction, every micro-expression of panic on the faces around the table. For months, she had prepared for this moment, gathering evidence, connecting dots that no one ever thought a girl from the suburbs would be able to connect. You thought you had buried Thomas along with his secrets, she said, her voice low. but laden with an authority that no college degree could confer. You thought an orphan child would never have the resources or intelligence to unearth the truth. What these powerful men didn't know was that underestimating Alexis Williams had been the first fatal mistake of many yet to come. And while they grappled with the reality that their carefully constructed narrative was crumbling, she was already 3 moves ahead, preparing a checkmate that would turn that boardroom into the stage for a justice she had waited 15 years to see served. The audio recording Margaret placed on the table seemed too small to contain 15 years of buried secrets. Richard stared at the device as if it were a bomb about to explode, which in a way it was. You can't prove anything with an old recording, he said, but his voice had lost all its former authority. Thomas was troubled in those last few months. Everyone knew that. Alexis leaned forward, her fingers tapping softly on the table, a gesture that seemed casual but made James Crawford gulp when he noticed the rhythmic pattern. It was Morse code. The girl was sending a message in Morse code. Disturbed, she repeated, pretending to consider the word. It's interesting that you use that word, Mr. Peterson, because that's exactly what Thomas said to Margaret on that recording, that he was disturbed by what he had discovered in the accounting books. Michael Torres, the director of human resources, tried to intervene. Look, kid, just because you're Thomas's daughter doesn't mean you can show up here making accusations. Accusations? Alexis interrupted, her voice maintaining that dangerous calm. I haven't made any accusations yet. I'm just sharing facts. She paused, observing each face. But since you brought it up, Mr. Torres, would you like me to explain why my birth certificate disappeared from hospital records? 3 days after Thomas's death, the silence that followed was so thick you could hear the air conditioner fan. Torres opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. Margaret smiled coldly. Oh, yes, I forgot to mention, Alexis has been very thorough in her investigation. Tell them about the other documents that disappeared. Alexis opened her backpack again, this time pulling out a tablet. Over the past 6 months, I've tracked 17 documents related to Thomas Peterson that were lost, misplaced, or damaged in various government departments. Very strange considering they were digital files with automatic backups. She slid her finger across the screen, showing a detailed spreadsheet. But here's something interesting. All of these accidents happened within a 48-hour radius. Always on Friday afternoons, when fewer people were working. Richard tried to laugh, but the sound that came out was more like a strangled whisper. That's teenage paranoia, is it? Alexis tapped another file on the tablet because I also found out that a company called Clearwater Solutions received digital archiving consulting contract from the city during the same periods. A company that interestingly has Richard Peterson listed as a minority shareholder. The blood drained completely from Richard's face. James Crawford loosened his tie, sweating visibly. Michael Torres stared at the door as if calculating his chances of escape. Margaret watched everything with the satisfaction of someone watching an opponent fall into a trap she helped build. Alexis, she said softly, tell them about Mr. Davidson. For a moment, all the men in the room seemed to forget how to breathe. Robert Davidson. Alexis nodded, consulting her tablet again. Senior accountant at Peterson Holdings from 1998 to 2008. Responsible for the reports Thomas was reviewing on the night of his death. She looked up, meeting Richard's terrified gaze. Fired too. Weeks after Thomas's funeral for unspecified irregularities. Moved to another state immediately. Richard tried to stand up, but his legs gave way, and he sat back down heavily. How? How did I find Davidson? Alexis smiled for the first time since she had entered that room, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Social media is an incredible tool, Mr. Peterson, especially when you know what questions to ask and have enough time to do the proper research. She turned the tablet so everyone could see the screen, a photo of a middle-aged man sitting in a cafe, clearly talking to someone across the table. The date in the lower right corner showed just 3 weeks ago. Davidson was very helpful. Alexis continued casually, especially after I explained that I wasn't interested in destroying his new life, just in finding the truth about my father. He still had copies of everything. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. 10 years of altered financial reports, fictitious contracts, fake invoices. A systematic money laundering operation that siphoned more than $20 million from the company over the decade. $23,400,000. Alexis corrected precisely. To be exact. divided between accounts at 3 different banks, all controlled by a network of shell companies. James Crawford was hyperventilating. That's impossible. We never what? Alexis asked innocently. Never thought anyone would find out. Never imagined a girl from the suburbs would have the intelligence to connect the dots, or never expected Davidson to keep evidence. Richard tried one last desperate gambit. Even if that's true, you're still a minor. I can't run a company, Alexis nodded, but I can, with the proper legal guidance, initiate a full forensic audit of all Peterson Holdings' financial operations for the last 15 years. I can also file federal criminal complaints for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. She paused, savoring the moment like someone tasting fine wine. And I can do all of that by going public with all the documented evidence I collected, including the recordings of our conversations today. Recordings, Michael Torres stammered. What recordings? Alexis discreetly touched a small device attached to the strap of her backpack. A red light flashed silently. Oh, this little thing. It's legal to record conversations in the state when you're a minor and documenting possible fraud against you. I consulted 3 different lawyers to make sure. The men around the table looked like statues of salt, motionless, pale, and slowly crumbling under the weight of their own unmasked arrogance. Margaret closed her briefcase with a satisfying click. Alexis, I think it's time to reveal our final proposal to them. Our proposal? Richard muttered, his voice almost inaudible. Alexis rose slowly, her posture radiating an authority that contrasted sharply with her age. For months, she had planned every move, anticipated every reaction, prepared every counterattack. What these powerful men did not yet know was that the helpless teenager they had underestimated was about to offer them a choice that none of them were prepared to face. Gentlemen, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade, the time has come to discuss the terms of my mercy. As the executives struggled between panic and disbelief, Alexis stood there as the center of a hurricane she herself had created, knowing that the real storm was yet to come. Because what none of them suspected was that everything that had been revealed so far was just the warm-up for the real coup she had planned, a blow that would not only restore her inheritance, but completely rewrite the power structure of that company that thought it could bury the truth along with her father. My proposal is very simple, Alexis said, walking slowly around the table like a predator who had finally cornered its prey. You can resign. Voluntarily return the stolen money and publicly confess your crimes, or what? Richard shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of despair. You're just a child. No one will take you seriously. Alexis smiled, tapping the small device in her backpack again. Actually, Mr. Peterson, our conversation has been broadcast live for exactly 43 minutes. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the air conditioning dared to make a sound. Broadcast live, James Crawford whispered, his face turning a worrying shade of gray. Margaret opened her laptop and turned the screen so everyone could see. On the screen, a YouTube stream displayed live exposed corruption at Peterson Holdings with over 47,000 views and comments increasing by the second. 17,543 people have watched you admit to corporate fraud in the last 5 minutes. Alexis reported casually, consulting her phone, including several very interesting people. Richard tried to stand, but his legs failed him. You can't. This is illegal. Actually, it's completely legal. An authoritative voice sounded from the doorway. 3 federal agents entered the room, followed by 2 local police detectives. I'm Federal Agent Sarah Martinez. Alexis Williams came to us 2 weeks ago with evidence of corporate fraud and money laundering. The lead agent approached the table, surveying the scattered documents. We have arrest warrants for Richard Peterson, James Crawford, and Michael Torres. No. James suddenly stood up, trying to run for the door. One of the detectives effortlessly intercepted him, handcuffing him as he muttered incoherently about misunderstandings and consulting lawyers. Michael Torres had gone into complete shock, sitting motionless as tears streamed silently down his face. My family, he whispered, my children will see this on the internet. Richard, however, was still trying to maintain some control. You can't prove anything. A rebellious teenager with forged documents. Alexis opened her backpack one last time, pulling out a different tablet. Remember Mr. Davidson, our repentant accountant? Well, he didn't just keep copies of the financial documents. She pressed play on a recorded video. The image showed Richard Peterson in his office 3 years ago, clearly instructing Davidson on how to mask illegal transfers. The audio quality was crystal clear. Make sure nothing can be traced back to me. Richard's voice echoed in the room. If anyone finds out, you take all the blame. I have too much protection to go down for a few million. The blood drained completely from Richard's face. That was taken out of context. We have 14 hours of similar recordings. Agent Martinez informed him, nodding to her colleagues. Mr. Davidson was very meticulous in documenting his interactions with you after realizing he was being used as a scapegoat. As the agents approached Richard, he finally lost all composure. You don't know who you're messing with, he yelled at Alexis. I have contacts, influence. I will destroy you and your family of slum dwellers. The racist comment was the last straw. The streaming chat exploded with outrage, and views jumped to over 80,000. Comments demanding justice multiplied by the second. Alexis, however, maintained her dignified calm. Mr. Peterson, in a few minutes, your company will be taken over by federal administrators. Your personal accounts will be frozen. And this video of you calling a black family slum dwellers live will be seen by millions of people. She paused, watching him being handcuffed. But the real irony is that my father, Thomas, left very specific instructions in his real will, the one you try to destroy, but Davidson kept a copy of instructions on how the company should be run if anything happened to him. Margaret smiled. Removing one last document from her briefcase, Thomas foresaw that Richard would try to steal his daughter's inheritance, so he set up a trust fund with 51% of the company's shares, which could only be accessed by Alexis when she turned 16. 51%, Richard repeated, incredulous, an absolute majority, Alexis confirmed, which means that legally I am the new controlling owner of Peterson Holdings. And my first decision as owner is to fire you all for just cause and sue each of you for fraud and embezzlement. James Crawford, still handcuffed, began to sob. I have a family, a mortgage, please. You should have thought about that before stealing $23 million. Alexis replied emotionlessly as the executives were escorted out of the room. Richard turned one last time. You may have one today, but a girl like you will never be able to run a company like this. Alexis stared him down. Mr. Peterson, a girl like me just exposed a 15-year conspiracy, gathered evidence the FBI couldn't find in a decade, and dismantled your criminal empire with a tablet and an old backpack. She paused, her smile finally showing a flash of satisfaction. I think I can handle a few spreadsheets. As the door closed behind the arrested criminals, the live stream remained active. The comments were a mix of outrage at the corruption that had been exposed and admiration for Alexis' intelligence and courage. Margaret closed her laptop and watched Alexis, who remained strangely calm for someone who had just revolutionized her entire life. How do you feel? She asked softly. Alexis looked out the panoramic window, watching the city stretch out below. I feel like my father can finally rest in peace. What no one on the live stream, or even Margaret, knew yet was that Alexis's true revenge went far beyond exposing Richard Peterson. What she had discovered about her father's death and the plan she had developed to truly honor his memory was just beginning to unfold. And it would change not only Peterson Holdings, but the entire community that had been neglected by decades of corporate greed. 6 months after the day that changed everything, Alexis Williams sat in the same conference room where she had been ridiculed. But now the table was filled with new faces, competent executives of diverse ethnicities whom she had personally hired. Peterson Holdings, renamed Williams Peterson Corporation, had become the fastest-growing company in the industry. Under Margaret Collins' leadership as CEO, and with Alexis overseeing strategic decisions, the company had not only recovered the stolen $23 million, but had tripled its profits by implementing revolutionary ethical practices. Richard Peterson, meanwhile, was serving a 15-year sentence for corporate fraud and money laundering. The video of his racist live comment had gone viral, viewed by over 10 million people, and resulting in his complete social rejection. James Crawford had lost his home, his family, and declared bankruptcy after civil lawsuits. Michael Torres now worked as a salesman in a department store, his corporate career destroyed forever. The meeting with the investors was a success, Margaret reported, smiling. Alexis, they want to expand our college scholarship initiative for. No, James suddenly stood up, trying to run for the door. One of the detectives effortlessly intercepted him, handcuffing him as he muttered incoherently about misunderstandings and consulting lawyers. Michael Torres had gone into complete shock, sitting motionless as tears streamed silently down his face. My family, he whispered, my children will see this on the internet. Richard, however, was still trying to maintain some control. You can't prove anything. A rebellious teenager with forged documents. Alexis opened her backpack one last time, pulling out a different tablet. Remember Mr. Davidson, our repentant accountant? Well, he didn't just keep copies of the financial documents. She pressed play on a recorded video. The image showed Richard Peterson in his office 3 years ago, clearly instructing Davidson on how to mask illegal transfers. The audio quality was crystal clear. Make sure nothing can be traced back to me. Richard's voice echoed in the room. If anyone finds out, you take all the blame. I have too much protection to go down for a few million. The blood drained completely from Richard's face. That was taken out of context. We have 14 hours of similar recordings, Agent Martinez informed him, nodding to her colleagues. Mr. Davidson was very meticulous in documenting his interactions with you after realizing he was being used as a scapegoat. As the agents approached Richard, he finally lost all composure. You don't know who you're messing with, he yelled at Alexis. I have contacts, influence. I will destroy you and your family of slum dwellers. The racist comment was the last straw. The streaming chat exploded with outrage, and views jumped to over 80,000. Comments demanding justice multiplied by the second. Alexis, however, maintained her dignified calm. Mr. Peterson, in a few minutes, your company will be taken over by federal administrators. Your personal accounts will be frozen. Young people from underserved communities, Alexis nodded, looking out the same window where Richard used to project his power. Now she saw children playing in the new park the company had funded on the site of the former empty offices. You know what's ironic? She said, turning to Margaret, Richard spent his whole life trying to keep people like us out of power. In the end, it was a girl from the suburbs who built the empire he always dreamed of having. Alexis's cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Davidson, the former accountant who had provided the crucial evidence. He was finishing law school, funded by the new Thomas Peterson Foundation for Second Chances. Alexis smiled. Putting her phone away, she had learned that true. Revenge was not destroying her enemies. It was building something so extraordinary that their malice became completely irrelevant. That teenager who had walked into a boardroom with an old backpack had proven something fundamental. Underestimating someone based on prejudice is not only morally wrong, it's strategically stupid. In the end, Richard Peterson was not defeated by hatred or revolt. He was defeated by intelligence, preparation, and a young woman who turned every obstacle into fuel for something greater. The best revenge, Alexis had discovered, is to achieve success that your oppressors could never imagine, and to use that success to create opportunities that they tried to deny others.